Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled out from under the atmospheric processor unit. The machine hummed quietly above him, its blue lights blinking in steady patterns that told him everything was working fine. He had been checking the filters for 3 hours now, and his back ached from the cramped position. "All done on this side," Jake called out to his work partner. Vexstar stood near the main control panel, his forearms moving with practiced precision as he adjusted various settings. The Zeltharian was tall, nearly 7 feet, with a body that looked like it was made of living crystal and metal. His exoskeleton gleamed with a soft blue color under the station lights, and Jake had learned that this meant Vexstar was calm and focused. They had been working together for 6 months. Now on Research Station Delta 7, the station orbited a huge gas giant called Kepler 442b, and their job was to keep all the life support systems running smoothly. Jake had to admit that working with an alien took some getting used to at first, but Vexstar was good at his job and never complained about the long hours. "The pressure readings look normal," Vexstar said in his clicking voice. All Zeltharians sounded like they were speaking through a collection of tiny metal pieces, but Jake had gotten used to it. "We should finish the maintenance check within the hour," Jake nodded and picked up his toolkit. The station was quiet today, with most of the research staff busy in their labs. He could hear the distant hum of machinery and the soft whoosh of air being recycled through the vents. It was a peaceful sound that had become like background music to him. "Hey, did you hear we got a new scientist yesterday?" Jake said as he began checking the next unit in line. He was just making conversation, the way humans do when they work together. "She's working in the xenobiology department." Vexstar stopped what he was doing. His 4 hands froze over the control panel buttons. New scientist?" Vexstar asked. There was something different in his voice, but Jake was focused on his work and did not notice. "Yeah, her name is Dr. Zara. Nice lady. I helped her move some equipment to her lab yesterday. She seemed really smart, asking lots of good questions about how we keep the environmental system stable." Jake pulled out a wrench and began loosening a panel. "She mentioned she was from the same planet as you, small galaxy, right?" The clicking sound that came from Vexstar was sharper now, more rapid. Jake glanced over and saw that his partner's exoskeleton had changed color. Instead of the calm blue, there were streaks of red running through the crystal-like surface. "Zara is here?" Vexstar asked. The clicking was getting faster. "Yeah, seems like a real professional. She was telling me about her research on atmospheric adaptation in different species. Pretty fascinating stuff." Jake was still working, not paying full attention to his partner's growing agitation. "She said she had worked on some stations before, but never one this far from home. I told her you might be able to help her feel more comfortable, having someone from her own species around." The red streaks in Vexstar's exoskeleton were spreading, and now they were pulsing like angry lightning. The clicking sounds coming from his mouth area were so fast they almost sounded like a machine gun. Jake finally looked up from his work. He had never seen Vexstar like this before. The normally calm and professional alien was standing rigid, all 4 of his arms clenched into fists. His head was tilted back, and the clicking sounds were now mixed with what sounded like hissing. "Vexstar, are you okay?" Jake asked, standing up slowly. He had no idea what was happening, but every instinct told him something was very wrong. Vexstar turned toward him, and Jake saw that his partner's large compound eyes were now glowing with an angry red light. The blue color had completely disappeared from his exoskeleton, replaced by violent pulses of red and orange. "You spoke with her," Vexstar said, and his voice was no longer the calm clicking Jake knew. It was a harsh, grating sound that made Jake's skin crawl. "You helped her." "I just helped her move some boxes," Jake said, raising his hands in a peaceful gesture. "It was just being friendly. What's wrong?" But Vexstar was no longer listening. The alien let out a sound that was like nothing Jake had ever heard before. A combination of screaming and the noise of metal being torn apart. Then, without any warning, all 4 of Vexstar's arms swung forward at the same time. The control panel exploded. Sparks flew everywhere as metal crumpled and circuits shattered. The main display screen went black, then began showing random flashing colors before going dark completely. Alarms started blaring throughout the station as various systems began reporting failures. Jake threw himself backward as pieces of destroyed equipment flew through the air. One sharp piece of metal flew past his head so close he could feel the wind from it. The sound of the destruction was deafening, mixed with the continuing screams from Vexstar. When the noise finally stopped, Jake found himself on the floor, covered in small pieces of metal and plastic. The control panel was completely destroyed, reduced to a pile of twisted wreckage. Sparks still flew from some of the damaged wires, and the smell of burned electronics filled the air. Vexstar stood in the middle of the destruction perfectly. Still, his exoskeleton had changed again, now a dull gray color that Jake had never seen before. The alien's 4 arms hung at his sides, and he seemed to be staring at nothing. The alarms were getting louder, and Jake could hear the voice of Commander Lisa Wright coming through the emergency speakers. All personnel report status immediately. We have multiple system failures in atmospheric processing. Emergency teams to Section 7. Jake slowly got to his feet, checking himself for injuries. He had a few small cuts from flying debris, but nothing serious. He looked at the destroyed control panel and felt his heart sink. The atmospheric processors were critical to keeping everyone on the station alive, and now their main controls were completely gone. Vexstar, Jake said quietly, but his partner did not respond. The alien stood like a statue, that strange gray color spreading across his entire body. Jake heard running footsteps in the corridor outside, and a moment later Commander Wright burst through the door with 2 security officers behind her. She took one look at the destruction and immediately began speaking into her communication device. Medical team to atmospheric processing, Priority 1. Engineering team to atmospheric processing, Priority 1. Security, establish a perimeter. She looked at Jake, who was still staring at his motionless partner. What happened here? She asked. Jake opened his mouth to answer, but realized he had no idea how to explain what he had just witnessed. How do you tell someone that your alien colleague completely destroyed critical station equipment because you mentioned talking to a female of his species? I honestly don't know, Jake said finally. We were just talking and then he just snapped. Commander Wright looked at Vexstar, who still had not moved or responded to anything around him. Get him to medical, she ordered the security officers, and get our backup systems online immediately. Jake, I need you to tell me everything that happened here, step by step. As the security team carefully approached the motionless Zeltharian, Jake realized that their quiet, routine day had just become a crisis that could threaten everyone on the station. And he still had no idea why. Commander Wright ordered the security team to escort Vexstar to the medical bay while she examined the destroyed control panel. The Zeltharian moved like a sleepwalker, his gray exoskeleton looking dull and lifeless under the emergency lighting. Jake watched his former partner disappear down the corridor and felt a strange mix of concern and fear. Jake, I need you to focus, Commander Wright said firmly. Can you get these systems working again? Jake looked at the twisted metal and sparking wires that used to be their main control panel. The backup systems were keeping the air flowing. For now, but they were not designed to run the entire atmospheric processing network for long. Red warning lights blinked all around them, and the constant beeping of alarms made it hard to think clearly. I can try, Jake said, pulling out his tablet to check the system status. But this is going to take time. We need parts and someone who really knows these systems. How much time do we have? Jake studied the readings on his screen. The numbers were not good. With the backup systems running at full capacity, maybe 2 days before we start having real problems. But if anything else fails. He did not finish the sentence because they both knew what it meant. Commander Wright activated her communicator. Pete Collins to atmospheric processing, Priority 1. Within minutes, Jake's friend Pete arrived with a toolkit and a worried expression. Pete was the station's communications officer, but he also had training in emergency repairs. He took one look at the destruction and whistled softly. What happened here? Pete asked. The whole station is talking about some kind of explosion. Vexstar had some kind of breakdown, Jake explained while he began pulling apart the damaged equipment. He destroyed everything and then just shut down completely. Pete started helping Jake separate the broken pieces from anything that might still be useful. That does not sound like Vexstar at all. He is always so calm and professional. That is what I thought too, Jake said. But when I mentioned meeting Dr. Zara, he completely lost it. The new Zeltharian scientist? Pete asked. What does she have to do with anything? Before Jake could answer, they heard footsteps in the corridor. Dr. Zara appeared in the doorway, her own exoskeleton a deep purple color that Jake had learned meant concern or worry in Zeltharians. Unlike Vexstar, she was smaller and more delicate-looking, but her forearms moved with the same precise grace. I heard about the incident, Dr. Zara said in her clicking voice. Is Vexstar injured? He is in medical, Commander Wright answered. But we could use your help understanding what happened here. Dr. Zara approached the destroyed control panel carefully, her compound eyes taking in every detail. This level of destruction is not normal behavior for our species. Vexstar must have been under extreme stress. Jake said Vexstar became aggressive. When he mentioned meeting you, Commander Wright said directly, can you explain why that would cause such a reaction? Dr. Zara's exoskeleton shifted to a darker purple, and she was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than usual. Zeltharian males can become territorial when they encounter potential mates, she said finally. But this reaction seems far more severe than normal. Vexstar may be suffering from what we call void sickness. Void sickness? Jake asked, looking up from the wiring he was trying to untangle. It is a psychological condition that affects Zeltharians who spend too much time away from our homeworld. Dr. Zara explained, our brains are adapted to the specific electromagnetic fields of our planet. When we are away too long, we can become unstable, especially in situations involving social stress. Pete stopped what he was doing. How long has Vexstar been on this station? Nearly 2 years, Commander Wright answered. He came here straight from the academy. Dr. Zara's exoskeleton turned an even darker shade. That is far too long for someone his age. The condition can become dangerous if left untreated. Dangerous how? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. In severe cases, the affected individual can become completely catatonic. Without proper treatment, it can be fatal. The room fell silent except for the continuing beep of warning alarms. Jake felt a heavy weight in his stomach. Vexstar might be dying, and it was partly because Jake had mentioned meeting Dr. Zara. What kind of treatment does he need? Commander Wright asked. Ideally, he should return to our homeworld immediately, Dr. Zara said. But the nearest Zeltharian medical facility is weeks away, and I do not think he has that much time. Jake tried to focus on the repair work, but his mind kept wandering to his colleague lying in the medical bay. For 6 months, they had worked side by side, and Jake had never suspected that Vexstar was struggling with anything more serious than homesickness. He felt guilty for not noticing the signs. There might be another option, Dr. Zara said slowly. If we could recreate the electromagnetic conditions of our homeworld, it might help stabilize his condition. How would we do that? Pete asked. Dr. Zara looked around the room, her eyes focusing on the research equipment that lined the walls. This station studies atmospheric conditions in gas giants. The equipment here generates various types of electromagnetic fields for research purposes. Jake suddenly understood what she was suggesting, and his heart sank even further. You want to use the atmospheric research equipment to help Vexstar. It might work, Dr. Zara said. But it would require significant power and careful calibration. Commander, Wright saw the problem immediately. The same power we need to run the atmospheric processors and keep everyone alive. Yes, Dr. Zara said quietly. Jake stared at the broken control panel and felt the full weight of their situation. They were stuck on a space station with failing life support, and their only hope of fixing it was to work together with other species, who were now dealing with their own psychological problems. The two Altarian scholars on the station had already started showing signs of stress, becoming obsessed with analyzing every detail instead of taking action. The other alien crew members were falling back on rigid procedures that did not account for their current emergency. "We need to get these repairs done first," Jake said finally. "Then we can worry about helping Vexstar." But even as he said it, Jake realized something that made him uncomfortable. While the alien crew members were becoming less effective under stress, he and Pete were actually working better together. They were adapting to the crisis, finding new ways to solve problems, and somehow staying calm despite the danger. Pete seemed to be thinking the same thing. "You know, it is strange. Everyone else on this station is brilliant at their specialties, but when things go wrong, they seem to freeze up. Maybe that is just how different species handle stress," Jake said, but he was beginning to suspect there was more to it than that. Dr. Zara had been listening to their conversation, and now she spoke up again. "I have been observing the human crew since I arrived yesterday. You respond to crisis situations differently than most species." "Different how?" Commander Wright asked. "Most species become more rigid under stress, falling back on established patterns and procedures. But humans seem to become more flexible, more creative. It is quite remarkable." Jake did not feel remarkable. He felt scared and overwhelmed and responsible for his colleague's condition. But as he looked around at the destroyed equipment, he realized that he was already forming ideas about how to fix things, ways to combine different systems and methods the original designers never intended. Maybe Dr. Zara was right. Maybe humans really were different when it came to handling emergencies. The question was whether that difference would be enough to save everyone on the station, including Vexstar. Jake wiped his hands on his coveralls and stepped back to look at their progress. After 8 hours of continuous work, they had managed to restore basic functions to about half of the atmospheric processing systems. It was not enough to keep the station running safely for more than another day, but it was better than nothing. Pete was lying on his back under a control console, his legs sticking out as he worked on rewiring the backup systems. "Hand me that blue connector," he called out, his voice muffled by the machinery above him. Jake found the part and passed it down. Around them, the station hummed with the sound of overworked backup systems struggling to keep up with demands they were never designed to handle. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and the constant beeping of warning alarms had become background noise. "We have got company," Commander Wright announced as she entered the room. Behind her came Captain Roy Barnes, a weathered man in his 50s who commanded one of the supply ships that regularly visited the station. His ship had arrived right on schedule, but the docking systems were too damaged for him to connect safely to the station. "Hell of a mess you have got here," Captain Barnes said, looking at the destroyed equipment. "My ship is loaded with supplies you folks need, but I cannot dock with your systems acting up like this. How long can you wait?" Jake asked, not looking up from the circuit board he was repairing. "Maybe 12 hours before I have to move on to my next delivery. After that, you will not see another supply run for 3 weeks. Jake felt his stomach tighten. 3 weeks was longer than their backup systems could possibly last, even if they managed to get more of the main systems online. They needed those supplies, but they also needed the docking systems working perfectly to receive them. "There might be another way," said a voice from the doorway. Alex Chun, the station's junior engineer, stepped into the room carrying an armload of equipment from the research labs. Alex was young, barely 24, but he had a gift for seeing solutions that more experienced engineers missed. "What do you have in mind?" Commander Wright asked. Alex set down his equipment and pulled out a tablet with technical drawings on it. "I've been studying the atmospheric research equipment we use to analyze the gas giant below us. Most of it generates electromagnetic fields and pressure variations to simulate different planetary conditions." "And?" Pete asked, sliding out from under the console. "What if we use that equipment to create a makeshift control system? The research computers are designed to make precise adjustments to atmospheric conditions. We could reprogram them to control our life support systems instead." Jake looked at the drawings on Alex's tablet. It was a crazy idea, but it might actually work. That would mean completely rewiring the interface systems and reprogramming the control software. Exactly, Alex said with a grin. And the best part is we already have most of the parts we need right here in the research labs. Captain Barnes scratched his beard thoughtfully. Sounds risky. What happens if it does not work? Then we are no worse off than we are now, Jake said. He was already starting to see how they could make Alex's idea work. But if it does work, we could have the docking systems back online in time for your delivery. Commander Wright looked around at the faces of her crew. The alien members of the team had been struggling with the crisis all day. The two Altarian scholars had become so obsessed with analyzing the exact cause of each system failure that they had barely contributed to the actual repairs. The other alien crew members kept suggesting that they follow standard emergency procedures, even though those procedures clearly did not apply to their current situation, but the humans were different. Instead of becoming paralyzed by the scope of the crisis, they were finding new ways to solve problems. Jake could see it in their faces. They were scared, but they were also excited by the challenge. "Do it," Commander Wright said, finally. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Jake coordinated the work, assigning tasks based on what each person did best. Alex focused on the software reprogramming, his young mind unburdened by assumptions about how things were supposed to work. Pete handled the communication systems, making sure they could maintain contact with Captain Barnes' ship. Commander Wright managed the logistics, making sure they had the parts and power they needed. Jake found himself acting as a translator between the different approaches his teammates were taking. When Alex got stuck on a programming problem, Jake helped him see it from a different angle. When Pete ran into compatibility issues with the communication protocols, Jake showed him how to work around them using techniques from atmospheric processing. It was exhausting work, but Jake realized something interesting was happening. The human crew was not just solving the immediate crisis, they were getting better at working together under pressure. Each challenge they faced taught them something new about how to coordinate their efforts more effectively. Meanwhile, the alien crew members continued to struggle. Dr. Zara tried to help, but she kept suggesting modifications based on Zeltharian engineering principles that did not apply to human-built systems. The Altarians had produced a detailed analysis of everything that was wrong, but they seemed unable to move from analysis to action. "It is fascinating," Dr. Zara said during a brief break. She had been watching the human crew work with obvious interest. "Your species approaches problem-solving in a completely different way than mine." "Different how?" Jake asked, taking a sip of coffee from a cup that had gone cold hours ago. "When faced with a crisis, most species fall back on what they know best. Zeltharians rely on our technical expertise. Altarians analyze everything in great detail. But humans seem to improvise, to try new combinations of ideas that no one has tested before." Jake had never thought about it that way, but he realized Dr. Zara was right. They were taking equipment designed for studying gas giant atmospheres and turning it into life support controls. They were combining software from 3 different systems and making them work together in ways the original programmers never intended. "Maybe that is because humans are not really specialists at anything," Pete said, overhearing the conversation. "We are pretty good at lots of different things, but we are not the best at any one thing. That might be exactly why you excel in situations like this," Dr. Zara said. "You are not limited by assumptions about how things should work." As if to prove her point, Alex called out from across the room. "Got it. The interface is working. We should be able to control atmospheric pressure and docking systems from the research lab computers." Jake hurried over to check Alex's work. The display screens showed familiar readings, but they were being controlled by completely unfamiliar equipment. It should not have worked, but somehow it did. "Captain Barnes," Commander Wright called into her communicator. "We are ready to try a docking sequence." "Copy that," came the reply. "Beginning approach." Everyone in the room held their breath as they watched the displays. The makeshift control system guided Captain Barnes' ship through a careful docking procedure. adjusting pressure and alignment with precision that matched the original equipment. When the docking clamps engaged with a solid thunk, the room erupted in cheers. They had done it. They had taken a devastating equipment failure and turned it into a working solution using nothing but creativity and determination. But even as Jake celebrated with his teammates, he knew their work was far from over. The atmospheric systems were still running on borrowed time, and somewhere in the medical bay, Vexstar was still fighting for his life. Jake stood in the medical bay looking down at Vexstar, who had not moved in over 12 hours. The Zeltharian's exoskeleton had turned an even paler shade of gray, and the medical equipment showed that his vital signs were getting weaker. Dr. Helen Parks, the station's human medical officer, checked her readings with a worried expression. "His condition is deteriorating faster than I expected," Dr. Parks said quietly. "I have contacted every medical database I can access, but there is very little information about treating void sickness in Zeltharians." Jake felt a heavy weight in his chest. Despite everything that had happened, Vexstar was still his partner and friend. They had worked together through long shifts, shared meals in the cafeteria, and even played simple card games during their breaks. The fact that Vexstar was dying while Jake was celebrating their engineering success made him feel sick. "There has to be something we can do," Jake said. Dr. Zara entered the medical bay, her purple exoskeleton now so dark it was almost black. "I have been in communication with medical experts on my homeworld. The situation is more serious than I initially thought." Commander Wright, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. "What exactly are we dealing with?" "Void sickness is not just a psychological condition," Dr. Zara explained. "Extended separation from our planet's electromagnetic field causes physical changes in our brain chemistry. Without treatment, Vexstar's nervous system will shut down completely within the next 24 hours. Jake ran his hands through his hair, trying to think. "You mentioned using the research equipment to simulate your planet's electromagnetic field. Would that work?" "It might," Dr. Zara said. "But it would require precise calibration and enormous amounts of power. The same power we need to keep the atmospheric systems running." The room fell silent as everyone understood the terrible choice they were facing. They could try to save Vexstar, but doing so might kill everyone else on the station. Or they could focus on keeping the life support systems working and let Vexstar die. How much power would it take? Commander Wright asked. Dr. Zara consulted her tablet. "To generate a field strong enough to help Vexstar, we would need to redirect at least 60% of our available power for a minimum of 6 hours. "That would leave us running on emergency power only," Dr. Parks said. "If anything else failed during those 6 hours, we would all be in serious trouble." Jake stared at his unconscious colleague and felt anger rising in his chest. It was not fair that they had to choose between saving one life and risking everyone else. There had to be another way, some solution that nobody had thought of yet. What if we do not have to choose? Jake said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" Commander Wright asked. Jake began pacing around the small medical bay, his mind racing. "What if we use the power in cycles? 6 hours to help Vexstar, then switch back to full life support, then back to treatment, and so on." "That could work," Dr. Zara said slowly, "but it would require constant monitoring and precise timing. If we miscalculate even once, either Vexstar dies or the life support fails." "Then we do not miscalculate," Jake said firmly. "We set up teams to monitor both systems around the clock. We treat this like any other engineering challenge." Pete appeared in the doorway, still covered in grease from working on the atmospheric processors. "Did someone mention an engineering challenge?" When Jake explained the situation, Pete nodded thoughtfully. "It is risky, but it might work. We would need Alex to help with the computer programming to make the power switching automatic. And we would need someone who understands Zeltharian physiology to monitor Vexstar's condition," Dr. Parks added. "I can do that," Dr. Zara volunteered. "I have medical training in addition to my research background." Commander Wright looked around at her crew. Jake could see she was weighing the risks in her mind, trying to decide if the potential to save one life was worth endangering everyone else on the station. "There is something else you should know," Dr. Zara said quietly. "I have been observing this crisis from the beginning, and I have reached some conclusions about human behavior that might be relevant." "What kind of conclusions?" Jake asked. "Your species has a remarkable ability to coordinate complex activities under extreme stress. Most alien species, including my own, become less effective when faced with multiple simultaneous problems. But humans seem to thrive in these situations." Commander Wright raised an eyebrow. "Thrive might be too strong a word. We are all exhausted and scared." But you are still functioning," Dr. Zara pointed out. "You are still finding creative solutions. And working together effectively? That is extremely rare among galactic species." Jake did not feel like they were thriving, but he had to admit that Dr. Zara might have a point. Despite the crisis, despite the impossible choices they were facing, the human crew was still pushing forward and looking for ways to save everyone. "So what are you suggesting?" Pete asked. "I'm suggesting that if any crew could successfully manage a complex operation like switching power between life support and medical treatment, it would be a human crew," Dr. Zara said. "Most species would not even attempt something so dangerous." Jake looked down at Vexstar again. His friend was dying, and they had the knowledge and equipment to save him. The only question was whether they had the courage to try something that had never been done before. "I say we do it," Jake said. "It is incredibly dangerous," Commander Wright warned. "If we make one mistake, everyone on this station could die." "And if we do nothing, Vexstar definitely dies?" Jake replied. "He is part of our crew." "We do not leave crew members behind." Pete nodded in agreement. "Jake is right. We have gotten this far by taking calculated risks and working together. Why stop now?" Commander Wright was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of her crew. Finally, she activated her communicator. "Alex Chun to the medical bay, Priority 1. Captain Barnes, please report to the medical bay." When Alex and Captain Barnes arrived, Commander Wright explained the situation and the proposed solution. "Captain." Barnes listened carefully, then shook his head. "You folks are either brave or crazy," he said. "Probably both. But I have seen what your crew can accomplish when you put your minds to it. If anyone can pull off this kind of operation, it would be you. Does that mean you will help?" Jake asked. "My ship has emergency power cells that I can transfer to the station," Captain Barnes said. "It will not be much, but it might give you a little extra margin for error." Alex was already working on his tablet, sketching out the power management system they would need. "We can automate most of the switching, but we will need human operators monitoring everything constantly. This is going to require perfect coordination." Jake felt a familiar excitement building in his chest, the same feeling he got when facing a particularly challenging engineering problem. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also exactly the kind of impossible challenge that brought out the best in humans. "Then let us get started," he said. Jake stood in front of the main display screen, watching the power readings fluctuate as Alex made final adjustments to their automated switching system. They had been working for 6 straight hours to set up the most complex operation any of them had ever attempted. Every system on the station would need to work in perfect harmony for the next 12 hours, if they were going to save both Vexstar and themselves. "Power cycling system is ready," Alex announced from his position at the computer terminal. "We can switch between full life support and electromagnetic therapy every 30 minutes. That should give Vexstar enough treatment time while keeping our atmospheric system stable." Pete checked his readings from the communication station. "All monitoring systems are online. We will know immediately if anything starts to go wrong." Dr. Zara was in the medical bay with Vexstar, surrounded by equipment that would generate the specific electromagnetic field patterns of their homeworld. The research equipment had been completely reprogrammed to produce the exact frequencies that Zaltharian brains needed to function properly. "Medical team reports ready," came Dr. Zara's voice through the communication system. "Vexstar-S condition has stabilized, but we need to begin treatment soon." Commander Wright looked around. at her crew. Jake could see the worry in her eyes, but also something else, pride in what they had accomplished together. Everyone knows their assignments. We have one shot at this, so let us make it count. Jake activated the power switching sequence. The lights dimmed throughout the station as 60% of their power was redirected to the medical bay. In the distance, they could hear the atmospheric processors shifting to emergency mode, their backup systems taking over critical functions. Treatment cycle 1 beginning now, Dr. Zara reported. Electromagnetic field is stable and within normal parameters. For 30 minutes, Jake watched the displays like a hawk, monitoring every system on the station. The backup life support was holding, but just barely. Temperature readings showed a slow but steady increase in several sections and air recycling. Efficiency was down to 70% of normal levels. Switching back to full life support, Alex announced as the automated system kicked in. The lights brightened again, and Jake heard the atmospheric processors returning to full power. Fresh, cool air began flowing through the vents as the systems caught up on the work they had missed. How did Vexstar respond to the first treatment? Jake asked. His brain activity increased slightly, Dr. Zara replied. It is too early to tell if the treatment is working, but the signs are encouraging. They continued the cycle through the night. 30 minutes of electromagnetic therapy followed by 30 minutes of full life support over and over again. Jake found himself coordinating not just the technical aspects of the operation, but also the human element. When Pete got tired, Jake made sure someone else took over his monitoring duties. When Alex started making small programming errors from exhaustion, Jake caught them before they could cause problems. The alien crew members tried to help, but they struggled with the constant changes and split-second decisions the operation required. The Altarians kept wanting to stop and analyze each power cycle in detail before proceeding to the next one. The other species fell back on standard procedures. That did not account for their improvised setup, but the humans adapted to each new challenge as it arose. When the temperature control systems began overloading during the 4th hour, Pete figured out how to reroute cooling through the research lab equipment. When the air recycling efficiency dropped dangerously low during the 7th hour, Alex found a way to boost the backup systems. Using power from non-essential areas, Jake realized that Dr. Zara had been right about human behavior under stress. Instead of becoming rigid and following established patterns, they were becoming more creative and flexible with each passing hour. Every problem they solved taught them something new about how to work together more effectively. Treatment cycle 15 beginning, Dr. Zara announced. It was now the middle of the night, and everyone was running on caffeine and determination. Vexstar's brain activity is definitely improving. His exoskeleton is starting to show hints of blue coloration. Jake felt a surge of hope. After 10 hours of the most intense work of his life, they might actually be succeeding. But he also knew they still had 2 more hours to go, and their systems were being pushed far beyond their design limits. During the 18th treatment cycle, disaster nearly struck. One of the main atmospheric processors began overheating, and the emergency shutdown procedures would have cut power to the entire station. But instead of panicking, the human crew responded with the kind of coordinated effort that Jake was beginning to realize was uniquely human. Alex immediately began rerouting power to keep essential systems online while Pete contacted Captain Barnes to request emergency coolant from his ship. Jake coordinated the repairs while Commander Wright managed the overall crisis. Within 20 minutes, they had the processor back online and running more efficiently than before. That was remarkable, Dr. Zara said during a brief break between cycles. Most crews would have been forced to abandon the operation after a failure like that. We do not abandon our people, Jake said simply. As they entered the final hour of the operation, Vexstar began to show clear signs of recovery. His exoskeleton was now definitely blue around the edges, and his vital signs were stronger than they had been in days. During the 22nd treatment cycle, he even moved slightly. He is going to make it, Dr. Zara announced with obvious relief in her voice. The treatment is working. When they finally completed the 24th and final cycle, Jake felt like he could barely stand. But as he looked around at his exhausted crew, he felt an incredible sense of accomplishment. They had done something that most people would have considered impossible. Vexstar opened his eyes during the recovery period, his exoskeleton now a healthy blue color. When he saw Jake standing beside his medical bed, he made the soft clicking sound that Jake had learned meant gratitude. "I'm sorry," Vexstar said in his normal voice. "The sickness made me do things I would never normally do." "You do not need to apologize," Jake replied. "We are just glad you are okay." Over the following days, as the station returned to normal operations, Jake reflected on what they had accomplished. They had not just saved Vexstar's life, they had proven something important about human capabilities in crisis situations. Commander? Wright received a message from Galactic Command commending the crew for their innovative problem-solving and teamwork. But more importantly, word began to spread throughout the galaxy about the human crew who had refused to give up on their alien colleague. Jake found himself training other humans in what people were starting to call interspecies crisis management. The techniques they had developed during those 12 desperate hours were being studied and adapted for use on stations throughout human space. Vexstar returned to work with a small device that helped regulate his brain chemistry, preventing future episodes of void sickness. But more than that, he had gained a deep respect for human determination and creativity. "Your species has a gift," he told Jake one day as they worked together on routine maintenance. "You see possibilities where others see only problems?" Jake smiled as he adjusted a pressure valve. "Maybe that is just what happens when you are not the best at any one thing. You learn to be pretty good at everything." As he spoke, Jake realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their individual intelligence. It was their ability to bring out the best in others, even when those others were completely alien. And in a galaxy full of different species trying to work together, that might be the most valuable skill of all.